Greetings, everybody. My name is David Phillips, and I direct the program on peacebuilding and human rights at Columbia University. Very pleased that you could join this important discussion on the 2-year anniversary of the war in Artsakh. We're going to talk a little bit about conditions on the ground, the international response. But first, before we invite our panelists to participate in the discussion, let me just say a few words to frame the issues. As I'm sure most of our audience knows, Azerbaijan attacked Artsakh on September 27th, 2020, which launched a 44-day war, during which there were repeated and numerous violations of international humanitarian law and war crimes committed. These included the treatment of prisoners that violated the Geneva Conventions. They also committed cultural genocide, targeting Armenian Orthodox churches and religious icons. In 2020, more than 6,500 people were killed, and almost 100,000 ethnic Armenians were displaced. Azerbaijan still holds over 100 Armenian prisoners of war and civilian prisoners as hostages. Columbia University launched the Artsakh Atrocities Project immediately after the 2020 war. We thought it was important to document war crimes and use that as a basis for mobilizing international action. The site and a link to it is provided to you by Columbia at this time, is a state-of-the-art research platform providing data and analysis of the 2020 war in Artsakh and ongoing events. We're grateful to the Artsakh Ombudsman and also the Armenian Assembly of America for partnering with Columbia on this important project. Turkey and Azerbaijan launched another unprovoked attack against Armenians, which targeted homes and civilian infrastructure in September of 2022. In a naked land grab, Azeris are demanding a referendum on the status of Lake Sevan and Sihanouk province, claiming that they belong to so-called West Azerbaijan, Goycha, and Zangezur Republic. The Artsakh Atrocities Project is more than a research platform and database. It serves an advocacy function as well. We appeal to policymakers and opinion leaders to defend Armenians against Turkic aggression, warning of another Armenian genocide. I want to start by commending House Resolution 1351, bipartisan legislation introduced by Congressman Adam Schiff and members of the Congressional Caucus on Armenian Issues. The resolution condemned Azerbaijan's attacks on Armenia and Artsakh and called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Significantly, the legislation also calls for ending all assistance to Azerbaijan and lifting the waiver on Section 07 of the Freedom Support Act. Our campaign against Turkic aggression is an ongoing effort. We've been in contact with the Office of Representative Jackie Speer, who recently traveled to Armenia with Speaker Nancy Pelosi to show solidarity with Armenia. Congresswoman Speer is working on a House resolution on war crimes and violations of international law committed by Azerbaijani service members in both the 2020 conflict and the more recent conflict. Speer writes to Columbia, her office indicates, quote, "The project has been a great resource for our office." Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, introduced a bipartisan resolution along with SFRC member Marco Rubio just yesterday, calling to stop security assistance to the Aliyev regime and condemning the Azerbaijani military's illegal, unprovoked assault on sovereign Armenian territory. The resolution calls Azerbaijan's illegal invasion of Armenia on September 13th, 2022, a quote, "flagrant violation of Armenia's sovereignty and territorial integrity and a violation of international law." This violation resulted in over 200 Armenians being killed or missing in action as well as the displacement of close to 3,000 civilians, as well as the unlawful detention of 23 additional Armenians. There are many people who I'd like to acknowledge, but first, Victoria Melkonyan, who heads the Armenian Students Association at Columbia, is co-sponsoring this webinar with the program on peacebuilding and human rights. Victoria, we're pleased to support your work and the work of Armenian students at Columbia in any way that you deem useful. Our first speaker is going to be Gegham Stepanyan, who is the Ombudsman of the Republic of Artsakh. He's ably assisted by Armin Asrian, who works with Columbia on updating the Atrocities Project website. Tom McDonnell is a professor of law at Pace University and chair of the International Human Rights section of the American Association of Law Schools. He's going to focus his law on developments on the ground, including the mistreatment and torture of prisoners, unfair trials, the targeting of civilians and of civilian objects. And I hope that he'll also include targeting religious and cultural icons in his remarks. My friend Michael Rubin is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute and a former Pentagon official. He'll share with us some ideas about accountability strategies. Since Azerbaijan is not a signatory to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, he'll explore other tools at the disposal of the US government that include naming and shaming, but go beyond that. And lastly, we'll also hear from my good friend and colleague, Van Krikorian, who's a lawyer and co-chairman of the Armenian Assembly of America. He'll focus on the US response to recent developments. Van was the author of Section 907 and is more familiar with these details than anyone with whom Columbia works. So I'd like to thank all the panelists for participating. I'll facilitate the transition from one panelist to the other, but this serves as their introduction. And now we'll start the discussion with words from Gegham, the Ombudsman from the Republic of Artsakh. Gegham Stepanyan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm pleased to join you in this discussion and to have this opportunity to present the situation that we currently have in Artsakh 2 years after the war. Of course, during these 2 years, we have numerously stated about, reported about the human rights violations and the war crimes that were recorded during the 44-day war, and also about the continuing ethnic cleansing policy that the Azerbaijani leadership continues to carry out against the people of Artsakh. The attitude of Baku after the establishment of ceasefire manifested that they continue to adhere to the policy aimed at the complete eviction of Armenians from Artsakh and aimed at keeping the population of Artsakh under constant terror and fear, and just to force people to leave their homes, and thus Azerbaijan will gain the territory of Artsakh without its indigenous people, without Armenians. So today we are facing the direct consequences of the ethnic cleansing policy of Azerbaijan, which is being implemented with the use of different methods. I will try to touch upon the methods that the Azerbaijani authorities are using to intimidate the population of Artsakh and to actually reach their purpose. The first is the regular violations of the ceasefire regime. The November 9, 2020 trilateral statement, which was reached by the presidents of Azerbaijan, Russian Federation, and the Prime Minister of Armenia, the first point enshrined the complete termination of all hostilities and the establishment of ceasefire. But just 1 month later, one month after the establishment of ceasefire, the Azerbaijani side attacked and took control over 2 communities of Artsakh in Hadrut region with total 500 population. As a result, 9 servicemen were killed and 64 were captured, and 30 of whom today are still illegally kept in Azerbaijan's custody. Another wave of escalation launched by Azerbaijan we faced in February-March 2022, when Azerbaijani military forces crossed the line of contact and invaded the territory of Parukh village in Askeran region and took control over some part of Karaguluk Height. It should be noted that this height has strategic meaning, importance for the whole Askeran region, because it controls the vital infrastructure, the roads, and the daily life of civilians in surrounding civilian communities. And Azerbaijan continuously disrupts the normal life of people living in surrounding civilian communities. And of course, the latest escalation that we faced in August 2022, when once again Azerbaijani military forces attacked in the northern and northwestern directions of Artsakh, and also took control over some strategic heights. At the same time, Azerbaijani side is using its military positions located near civilian communities. We have 30 civilian communities that are located very close to the line of contact, and Azerbaijani combat positions located in the vicinity of those communities are regularly firing in the direction of residential areas of communities, but such intimidating and disrupting the normal life of civilians. During these 2 years after the establishment of ceasefire, the law enforcement bodies of Artsakh recorded 112 criminal actions of Azerbaijani side against civilians, against the right to life, property, family life, and other rights. As a result of which 3 civilians were killed, 15 servicemen were killed, total 18 people. 126 people were subjected to attempted murder, and 65 people were wounded. Concurrently, the other method of intimidation and the other method of ethnic cleansing that is used by Azerbaijan is the disruption, the creation of unbearable living conditions in Artsakh by disrupting the normal operation of vital infrastructure. We also the deliberate disruption of gas supply to Artsakh, which was recorded in February-March 2022, when Azerbaijani side deliberately blew up the pipeline, the only pipeline coming from the Republic of Armenia to Artsakh. And for almost 20 days, people of Artsakh were without gas supply and consequently without heating and hot water. And this brought with it a number of humanitarian problems, starting the problems in educational system, in healthcare, and other. And today, even today, Azerbaijan is using this leverage to intimidate the population. The investigation carried out by the Office of Human Rights Defender showed that Azerbaijani side installed licensors near the city of Shushi, and using this license that they are blocking the mobile communication on the whole territory of Artsakh. I mean, now after the change of the road that passes through Lachin corridor, the infrastructural vulnerability is more acute, because all infrastructure that comes from Armenia to Artsakh passes through the old road. And today, Azerbaijan has full control over all the vital infrastructure connecting Armenia with Artsakh. And another instrument of ethnic cleansing of Azerbaijan is the periodic psychological attacks on Armenians of Artsakh. They are spreading such kind of hatred, and they are attacking our people in social media. They, in February 2022 and March, they used loudspeakers to urge the population in communities located near line of contact to leave their homes, to leave their lands, to stop agricultural works, otherwise threatening with the use of force. We can clearly state that Azerbaijan, one of the main goals of Azerbaijan is the complete eviction of Armenians, and for such purpose they are using they are regularly resorting to the use of force or threat of force, which is which is prohibited by the international law. But the fact that the 2020 aggression of Azerbaijan was not adequately condemned by the international community gave Azerbaijan a green light to continue its policy of aggression and its policy of use of force. And of course, we should touch upon the continuing Armenophobia and hate speech against Armenians, which continues to be sponsored at the state level in Azerbaijan, although we have the decision of the UN International Court of Justice on the application of provisional measures, which call Azerbaijan to refrain from the Armenophobia, from the discrimination and from hate speech, but we see that it doesn't change the behavior of Azerbaijan. And we faced a new wave of Armenophobia against the people of Artsakh during the latest escalation in August 2022. I just want to quote one of the Azerbaijani member of parliament during this escalation. Armenia should stop supporting its territorial claims against Azerbaijan, that is the bloody separatism it has instigated in Karabakh. Unless this is the case, we should not grant them the right to a normal life. This is some kind of confession by the Azerbaijani side, saying that they are not granting the normal life in Artsakh. Of course, the presence of Russian peacekeepers in Artsakh is one of the main guarantees of security, and it served and continues to serve as a guarantee for restoring a normal living in Artsakh. But what we had during these 2 years and what we have now in Artsakh is really far from being called peace. And we continue to face new waves of aggression by the Azerbaijani side. Of course, we should also speak about other instrument of ethnic cleansing, which targets not the population of Artsakh, but the traces, the presence of our Armenian people in Artsakh. I mean, I'm talking about the erasure of Armenian cultural heritage, the vandalism against the cultural property that we have in the territories, in the occupied territories. Not only the Ombudsman's office, but also other human rights organizations, institutions recorded more than 100 cases of vandalism. And it is more than vivid that Azerbaijan continues its policy of erasure to prove to the world that Armenians have nothing to do with Artsakh, with Karabakh. And this is why also they are constantly stating that there is no Nagorno-Karabakh. And this means that their goal during the aggression of during the war of 2020 was not just to destroy the Republic of Artsakh, but to destroy the whole population or Armenian population. And of course, we should speak about the international isolation of Artsakh, which is continuously, Azerbaijan puts efforts to isolate Artsakh from international community. 2 years after the war, we still do not have the presence of any international organization in Artsakh. The only institution, the only organization that is present in Artsakh is the International Committee of Red Cross, and Azerbaijan is trying to close the office of ICRC in Stepanyan. They are putting huge efforts to close the ICRC office in Stepanyan. Their main goal is to isolate Artsakh as much as possible because they are interested in blocking the voice of Artsakh people. So for us, it has a vital importance to have the presence of international organizations in Artsakh. It will also help me as a human rights ombudsman to cooperate with them and to speak out as loud as possible and to present the situation and the ethnic cleansing policy against our people. This is generally the situation that we have in Artsakh. The situation that is full of uncertainty. People, the most common question that I am asked as a human rights defender is, what will be next? What will be our future? People are always trying to find answers to the questions that, the answers that I do not know, I can say. Yes, we are living in a very difficult and uncertain situation, but still trying to organize our life in Artsakh, because we think that our presence in Artsakh must have its defining role in the final resolution of Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and final definition of the status of Artsakh. Because I think that without considering the will of people who are affected, mostly affected by the conflict, it is not possible to reach the long-lasting peace and long-lasting solution of the conflict. So, speaking about the status of Artsakh, of course, the most preferable solution for us continues to be the recognition of the right to self-determination of Artsakh people. But I can say that even this situation of uncertainty is more preferable for us than any status under Azerbaijani rule. We continue to say that it is a red line for us not to be a part of Azerbaijan. And it is very logical demand from our side. Just we can bring an example, just bring an argument. We have a decision of the International Court of Justice saying that Armenians are being subjected to discrimination. And a natural question arises, how, to what extent it is logical to put a population which is under a discrimination, to subordinate that people to authority which is generating the discrimination. I mean, we continue to struggle for the status of Artsakh, for our independence, because it has really existential importance for us. It has real importance in sense of preventing the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh. So I think that I try to present the situation that we have, and I'm ready to answer the questions.
Gegham, thank you very much for that presentation. Very important for us to understand the systematic nature of the persecution and the ethnic cleansing that's going on. You also made an important point about the lack of internationalization. I hope that our other panelists will address this question of monitoring and reporting in their remarks, and we can think together about how to enhance your work locally through international partnerships and participation. Before we turn to our next speaker, let me just address a couple of housekeeping items. Firstly, I want everyone to know that this session is being recorded and we'll make it available to participants and others after the panel. Also, for those who have questions, please use the Q&A function to put your questions to the panel. And after the presentations, we'll have a chance for some interaction. Let's hear now from Professor Tom McDonnell, who's going to elaborate on the points that Gegham has made in a broader context of international humanitarian law and consider next steps. Tom, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, David. I appreciate you inviting me to this very distinguished panel. And I want to say I'm so impressed by Ombudsman Stepanyan's comments on the dire nature of the situation and the human rights and humanitarian law violations that his people is experiencing. I first wanted to just address the act of aggression by Azerbaijan against Armenia just earlier this month. I think we can't underestimate the danger when one country uses its armed force against the territory of another country. It is true that the boundary between Azerbaijan and Armenia has not been conclusively delimited, excuse me. But the attack on Armenia constitutes an aggression, okay, which is defined under Article 2.4 of the UN Charter, which prohibits the use of force or threat of force by any state against the territorial integrity of another. And that's exactly what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine earlier this year. Now, this is not yet at the scale, I hope it never gets to be the scale of what's happening in Ukraine, but nonetheless, it's the same kind of violation which really threatens the world order, not just what's happening in Azerbaijan and particularly in Armenia. So this is something the world community has to address and come out, in my view, much more forcefully than it has as of yet. I think we should also mention reports that not only was there an attack on Armenia soil, but also that the manner of attack, okay, reportedly constitutes an attack on civilians and civilian objects. So as you may or may not know, that when militaries get into war, that can be a violation of the UN Charter. But if they do it in a way that deliberately endangers civilians, deliberately attacks civilians, that constitutes under Article 51 of the first protocol of 1977 to the Geneva Conventions of 1949. That constitutes an illegal act and also actually can constitute a war crime as well. So I'm very concerned about the manner of the attack. Now, I should say in the 2020 war, there were claims that both sides had engaged in some indiscriminate attacks. So I think we have to recognize that. However, the fact that this was apparently unprovoked, there was no basis in self-defense for Azerbaijan to attack Armenia here. I think it's particularly worrying. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Nagorno-Karabakh itself, okay, and what Ombudsman Stepanyan, so articulately laid out for us. And I just wanted to talk in terms of international law. Now, it is a crime against humanity for one country, okay, well, not only a country, but individuals, to forcibly deport or remove individuals, particularly individuals of an ethnic group, out of their territory. And what it appears to be is that although we don't have forcible deportation in the sense that people at gunpoint are being marched out of Nagorno-Karabakh, still the spirit of what they are engaged in begins to approach that. You know, so I mean, and crimes against humanity are among the most serious, if not the most serious, violations that international law recognizes. So I think that's something we should bear in mind. The other thing is there's no question that the manner in which Azerbaijan is carrying out in this area is a violation of Article 27 of the ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which protects, ethnic groups, okay, from being persecuted in this fashion, and a violation of essentially discrimination, okay, on the basis of ethnicity, which is prohibited both by the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, also by the Convention for Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So I think that is apparent. And David, you're asking me about the attack on religious institutions, churches in particular, and the 1954 Hague Convention on Cultural Property expressly prohibits these types of attacks. So what we see here is a pattern of attacks against this area, which amounts to a clear violation of international law, which requires the international community to speak out. I'll talk about enforcement, and I hope I'm not stepping on one of my colleagues' later comments in a few minutes. I did want to address, because part of the discussion today was to look back at what happened, in 2020 and kind of see where we are today. And as Gegham mentioned, the Azerbaijanis failed to comply with Article 8 of the trilateral ceasefire agreement that was entered into on November 20th, 2020. And the ceasefire agreement really was essentially the peace agreement of the 2020 44-day war. And it called upon every country to, called on Azerbaijan and Armenia to repatriate those captured during that conflict, POWs captured during that conflict. Armenians fully complied. They repatriated, all Azeri prisoners of war. Unfortunately, the Azerbaijanis did not comply, and they withheld actually hundreds initially of POWs, and they later, released some, but still, as of our writing in 2020, they had some 100 or so or more, okay, POWs they had released, but I should say 100 they released, but not more than that. Since then, they've released approximately 150 POWs, but still, as Gegham mentioned, some 30 or more remain. And also, it is reported that over 80 are missing, have not been accounted for. And so there's been, I would have to say, some progress. I mean, more people have been released. I think one has to acknowledge that. But still, they tried some 39 or 40 Armenians for, quote unquote, tourism offenses and illegal border crossing, and sentenced them to fairly severe prison terms. 6 years, 39 individuals were sentenced to 6 years in prison. One was sentenced to 10 years, but another one was sentenced to 20 years for allegedly committing crimes in the 1990 Azerbaijan Armenian conflict. In any event, one of the things that was really troubling, a state, just for those who are new to international law, a belligerent state can try individuals for war crimes, okay? Even if they are uniformed soldiers. Okay? So if a uniformed soldier commits a war crime, that individual can actually be charged with that crime. That individual, however, cannot be charged with, for example, engaging in armed conflict, shooting and even killing an enemy combatant. Okay, that individual cannot be charged, okay, with damaging property intentionally, blowing up a munitions plant. Okay, that's considered part of the military immunities that combatants possess. But If they choose to try an individual for a war crime, intentionally killing civilians, for example, is a war crime. Well, there has to be a fair trial. Okay? And one of the difficulties, okay, particularly because they were the winners in that conflict, is a concept that many of you may be aware of, but I just want to note it, of so-called victor's justice. The idea, if you're a victor, then you try individuals who really aren't guilty of anything, but you're a victor and you have the power, so you can do it. And the real problem here is that the evidence is that the trials were simply not fair. Okay, most of the individuals tried did not have an attorney of their own choosing, if they had an attorney at all. Okay, and that they amounted to essentially show trials. Okay, and haven't seen any evidence since then that would support the proposition that these were fair trials. So I think that's a real blot, okay, among other things, on the Azerbaijani handling of this matter. And I think we have to deal with it. So what we have today is that, yes, more prisoners were released, okay, but there are at least 30 who have not been. And also there is a concern that, apparently 80 are missing, have never been accounted for. So that's another, I mean, now in warfare, sometimes things are difficult and it's hard to, to find individuals who are missing and the like, but still, I mean, bodies are identifiable typically. And the fact that a significant number are missing is disturbing. Now, I wanted to talk lastly, about, well, what can be done? Okay, in other words, this is, what we see here is a situation that has not improved in 2 years. If anything, it is getting worse. We're talking about greater instability, greater potential for armed conflict coming down, and also greater and significant human rights violations occurring as we sit here today, or as we speak today. And I think that the answer is quite challenging. I mean, as was pointed out by David, neither Armenia nor Azerbaijan are parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So none of the Azerbaijanis currently can be tried for any offenses that they've committed. And we can't even bring a prosecution. There's no such a thing as bringing a prosecution in absentia. So that's not possible. So what is possible? What can be done? Okay. And I think it does amount to what was referred to earlier as naming and shaming. We have to call this out. This has to be brought to the attention of the international community. It has to be, and leaders have to comment on it, and we have to get leaders to condemn what is going on here. So first, that I think has to be one of the foremost things that has to be done. Secondly, I think there may be ways to get certain countries to bring sanctions against Azerbaijan. Now, given the fact that Azerbaijan actually has significant gas resources, and gas resources, particularly given the war in Ukraine, okay, are in short supply, that may be a politically unpalatable step to take. But nonetheless, I think that's a step that we really have to take. And in the United States in particular, as was pointed out, we have two very strong resolutions, both from the House and bipartisan and the Senate, calling upon the condemnation and sanctions against Azerbaijan. I think that will be helpful. There's also a call for, providing Armenia more military equipment and the like, and I'll leave others to comment on that. Lastly, I think we have to use as many of the international institutions that are available at our disposal. I think as Armenia was quite correct in going to the ICJ, International Court of Justice, okay, who kind of reaffirms the act that this is absolutely discriminatory treatment of Armenians. And I think that the ICJ is a good voice. Also, Armenia has used the European Court of Human Rights, which came out with precautionary measures, which I think did help somewhat in getting more POWs released. So I think that was a good step. I think the other body that was recently employed was the CERD committee, the UN Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination, Racial Discrimination, which came out with a fairly good report on citing Azerbaijan for failing to address the POW issue, among other issues, as well as the hate crimes, the propagation of hate against Armenians. I think using the UN bodies, we also have not only the CERD committee, but you have the UN Human Rights Committee that monitors compliance with the International Convention Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. You also have the UN Torture Committee, which monitors compliance with the UN Convention Against Torture, and so I think those can be employed. But I think that has to be the struggle. I think it has to be a voice, okay, that's shouted out and heard around the world, and with the hope that we can get the international community to condemn the type of behaviors I discussed today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom, especially for those remarks about prisoners of war and civilian detainees. The Artsakh Atrocities Project has a subpage on POWs, which has important information, and I would refer that to our guests today. Tom, to what extent have any international agencies, like the International Committee of the Red Cross, had access to Azerbaijani detention centers? Is there any international monitoring and reporting?
Well, I did,
conditions?
the thing is, there have been reports where they were given access to some of the detention centers. Yes, they have been given access to some of detention centers. I am not aware of how wide an access, but they did, okay? So it may have been, and this is where I think international institutions, even though you don't have a court that could come in and charge individuals and arrest individuals for war crimes, but I think the European Court of Human Rights precautionary measures decision, I think, may have pushed Azerbaijan to let the ICRC in, at least in a limited way.
I'm also glad that you put this in a broader context of the events in Ukraine. And right now in the world, there's such a clear definition between autocracies and democracies. And I don't think anyone on this panel would argue that Azerbaijan is not an autocracy. Also, we should recognize that Armenians and the United States and Western countries share democratic values. Armenia is a strategic partner and an important ally. As fellow Democrats, we should rally to their support. So thanks for those comments, Tom.
Sure.
We're going to turn now to Michael Rubin, discuss a little bit more about accountability measures and innovative strategies. Michael's always been on the cutting edge of new thinking. Michael, we're glad that you could join the panel today, so thanks for being here.
Okay, thank you for having me, David. And I want to thank Columbia University, of course. You may call it new thinking. On my part, it may just be my background, where I used to work. I was a colleague of people like John Bolton, and I have to admit, I sometimes approach the United Nations with the same sort of cynicism that John Bolton does. I recognize the utility of some of the strategies that are put forward, especially when it comes to human rights, but ultimately, I worry about two things. Number one is the corrupting power of oil and gas and hydrocarbons, which has already been referenced. And number two is sometimes the United Nations has a tendency to bog down in a process which actually over the course of years and decades leads those involved to lose track of the forest through the trees. And then we end up with a system like a situation like Cyprus, where the occupation has become the normality. And it's important that what is going on now with Azerbaijan's aggression towards not only Artsakh, but also to Armenia, doesn't fall into that same pattern, nor do we fall victim to the sort of salami slicing strategy that we see China conduct in the South China Sea. So beyond simply the human rights aspect, which again is crucially important, we need moral clarity in our policy, and certainly the moral clarity is fully on Armenia's side in this case. It is important to see what other remedies we might have in the policy world in order to try to attack this problem with all the arrows in our quiver, rather than simply philosophically relying on a single type of policy prescription. One of the things I've been most curious about, having reread recently, is Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act. And of course, everyone in the audience is familiar with Section 907 as it relates to Azerbaijan. My question, though, is Azerbaijan isn't only acting alone. In many ways, it's acting as a proxy of Turkey. There's absolutely no way first of all, we know Turkish forces were providing logistical, if not direct combat assistance with regard to the 2020 Nagorno-Karabakh war. It would be foolish to suggest that Turkey, a supposed US NATO ally, wasn't aware of Azerbaijan's most recent attack on Armenia proper before that attack occurred. By the way, that also represents a quandary which the United States Senate, the Intelligence Committee, the Armed Services Committee, and the Foreign Relations Committee should address about whether we had an intelligence failure in which we were unable to detect the Azeri pre-positioning ahead of the attack, as well as Turkey's foreknowledge of it, or whether we simply chose diplomatically not to respond. But either way, that's a question for the oversight of the US Senate, and it's something that unfortunately should have been addressed after the 2020 attacks. Did we see this coming? And if not, why not? But certainly if we keep making the same mistake twice, it is a reason to for the Senate to step in and ask whether the problem is intelligence or the problem is diplomatic. Back to Section 907. The first part of Section 907 reads that the United States assistance under this or any other act other than assistance under Title V of this act may not be provided to the government of Azerbaijan until the president determines, and so reports to the Congress, that the government of Azerbaijan is taking demonstrable steps to cease all blockades and other offensive uses of force against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Fine. We can all agree that Azerbaijan is in violation of this, and therefore there should be no legal reason why the Secretary of State should repeatedly offer waivers. And this isn't just a castigation of Secretary Blinken. The same thing happened during the Trump administration as well. It's a bipartisan problem we have. And again, I go back to the corrupting power of the energy sector. But what's curious about this is when it says the United States assistance under this or any other act may not be provided to the government of Azerbaijan, it leaves open to interpretation whether that assistance is direct or indirect. The question which I think we really need to explore is whether we can apply Section 907 to the government of Turkey, NATO ally or not. If Turkey is providing direct assistance to Azerbaijan, and that assistance, because military assistance is fungible, is really rooted in the United States, whether we should start to apply and threaten to apply Section 907 to Turkey and cut off military aid to Turkey as well. We see how sensitive Turkey is to discussions of sanctions and how vulnerable it is to sanctions, being bankrupt as it is, and the lading accounting tricks aren't able to cover this up anymore, which is why the Turkish currency has lost 90% of its value over the last decade or so. But we also see a situation when we compelled, during the Trump administration, the release of Pastor Andrew Brunson with just some relatively minor sanctions on the Turkish steel industry. The fact of the matter is, we need to amplify Section 907 discussions outside of the narrow compartmentalization of Azerbaijan and bring it full square into the discussion of Turkey as well. Now, by training, I'm a historian of Iran. And when I worked in the Defense Department, my main issue was the Islamic Republic of Iran. And so I followed that closely. I still do translations for the US Foreign Military Studies Office and so forth. And while I may have disagreements with some on the panel with regard to the last administration's maximum pressure campaign against Iran, one of the logics to that maximum pressure campaign is that the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in Iran isn't simply a military unit. It also controls about 40% of the Iranian economy. And one of the problems which every administration, Obama, Trump, Biden, have when it comes to engaging and lifting sanctions and encouraging trade with Iran on the case of the European Union, for example, is how to get that investment to the Iranian people without it disproportionately benefiting, in Iran's case, something called Khatam al-Anbiya, the economic wing of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The logic of the maximum pressure campaign was to prevent partnership or investment into the economic infrastructure of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to prevent the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps from hijacking or siphoning off that money to fund its own terror apparatus. So let me get off Iran for a second and talk about SOCAR, the Azeri State Oil Company. Perhaps it's time to start considering whether or not we should be sanctioning not simply the money of the Lias, but the money of the economic infrastructure of their reign of terror, which has its roots with the state oil company of Azerbaijan. And ultimately, this would have follow-through effects if we use that maximum pressure strategy. Now, of course, because of the nature of oil, and especially after the Ukraine war, this isn't something that can be done instantly. But it's important to lay the groundwork for these issues in Congress and elsewhere, especially as new sources of gas and energy are coming online every day. Now, this brings me to the East Med pipeline, which would completely bypass Turkey. Now, earlier this year, the Biden administration withdrew US support for the East Med pipeline because they said it wasn't economically viable. Two things here. First of all, it shouldn't be for the State Department to determine what's economically viable or not. It should be for the investors in the project to determine whether it's economically viable. Also, we're comparing not apples to apples when it comes to some of the trans-Turkey pipelines, but we're comparing apples to oranges, because the nature of the East Med pipeline was that it was also able to accommodate hydrogen fuel, which is green and coming online. So it was a much higher quality pipeline, which would have the ability to adjust for much longer into the future, especially when it comes to the fight against climate change. Now, also, alongside the East Med pipeline is, of course, the Euro-Asia interconnector, which connects the Israeli electrical grid with that of Europe. Now, the beauty of the Euro-Asia interconnector is it's able to accommodate electricity from any number of sources, not just hydrocarbons, but also wind power, hydroelectric power. It's basically plug-in infrastructure, and it's already being built. It should be completed in the year 2024. So we already have alternatives to Turkey. We shouldn't, I mean, many in the Biden administration now recognize that it was an error to waive sanctions on Nord Stream 2, because that simply empowered Russia vis-a-vis Western Europe. We shouldn't be making the same mistake of Nord Stream 2 when it comes to Turk Stream and empowering dictatorships in Baku or Ankara. Nor should we think that Azerbaijani oil somehow bypasses Russia, or for that matter, from a US policy perspective, Iran. First of all one needs to do is look at the recent issues of gas swaps when it comes to Iran and the gas and oil transiting Turkish pipelines. But also, let's look at Lukoil's partnership with the government of Azerbaijan in the Caspian Sea. And the fact of the matter is, there's a lot of parallels between Azerbaijan and Turkey, of course. For a decade, one of the reasons why Erdogan was literally and figuratively allowed to get away with murder is because he was coasting on the reputation of what Turkey was in the past, and it's far from perfect, I understand, but he was coasting on the reputation of what Turkey was in the past rather than what it had become under him. Today, Azerbaijan is still coasting on a reputation as being an oasis free of Russian and Iranian influence, when the fact of the matter is Russian investment in Azerbaijan surpasses Russian investment in Armenia. And while critics can complain about the Armenia-Iran ties or Armenia-Russia ties, let's also face the fact, if we want to unravel those ties, then step one has to be lifting the illegal blockade. And I take us back, therefore, to Section 907. Now, other issues, legal issues, which we can talk about is, of course, the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which Washington is increasingly cracking down on. Foreign Agents Registration Act, simply, whether it's the United Arab Emirates in violation, and of course, they're now being investigated for some issues, or the Gulf state of Qatar, when people do a foreign state's bidding under direction of that state, it raises questions. Now, there's been some very good work about how the Foreign Agents Registration Act should apply to think tanks. And I'm proud to say the American Enterprise Institute neither engages in pay-to-play nor takes foreign or US government money. But at the same time, we need to have the same conversation with regard to universities. The fact of the matter is there's no angels in this game, and we've got to plug these loopholes. When it comes to naming and shaming, there's no better place to start than Madam Aliyev. The fact of the matter is no one should be vice president of UNESCO simply for the qualification of sleeping with the dictator of Azerbaijan. The fact of the matter is this is a clear conflict of interest, and it's something which delegitimizes UNESCO. Simply put, this isn't just about sushi, sorry. This is about the very legitimacy of UNESCO, far beyond the borders of Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh. I do believe, even as we talk about the cultural crimes and the cultural eradication that's being occurring as we talk about in Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh today, we need to have a very serious talk about what happened in the Jolfa Cemetery. And the reason is that cemetery was well documented. There's satellite footage of the world's largest collection of khanjars. And its eradication is a crime against history. No one, even historians who are sympathetic to Azerbaijan or for whatever motivations they have, can explain away logically what Azerbaijan did in the Kechavan with regard to the Jolfa Cemetery. Armenia should not defer. One of my frustrations, and I'm concluding now, is that Armenia should not defer international law onto the issue of who Nagorno-Karabakh belongs to. I saw some questions in the commentary section about this with regard to delineation of borders. But the fact of the matter is, after Stalin gerrymandered the borders in the Caucasus, we have multiple borders over time. The borders of the Soviet Socialist republics were not the same as the borders of the independent states which preceded them. I find it very interesting that when Azerbaijan redeclared its independence in 1991, it did so under the borders of the initial independent Republic of Azerbaijan, which of course did not control Nagorno-Karabakh. If we simply look at the census over time, you've got a situation that, you've got a situation in which in which Nagorno-Karabakh is the vast majority Armenian. Now, this has relation to the present day. It's not that it was just 94% Armenian in the 1920s, and it remained Armenian throughout the Soviet period, despite the best efforts of some ethnic cleansing. But we've got a situation where even those who Azerbaijan claims, who Aliyev claims, are natives to Nagorno-Karabakh, refuse to return to Nagorno-Karabakh, that the Aliyev regime has to actually threaten to withhold their social security payments to compel their return. If that's not an indication that even Azeris don't really care about Nagorno-Karabakh, I don't know what is. The fact of the matter is, Aliyev uses Nagorno-Karabakh in a manner to distract from the fact that corruption has become so great in Azerbaijan today that according to World Bank statistics, the per capita income in Armenia and Georgia, neither of which have those billions of dollars of oil wealth, is actually greater than the per capita income in Azerbaijan. People are grumbling in Azerbaijan. When I was in Baku in 2013 to give a number of lectures in universities, people would be very publicly supportive of Aliyev, but then in the taxi rides back and in college professor cars back, they would curse the Aliyev regime for what it was doing, and they would urge people not to fall for the illusion. He's using the Nagorno-Karabakh as a means to distract, the same old Arab-Israeli sort of strategy going back to the rejectionist days of the 1960s, 1970s, all the way up to the Arab Spring. And we shouldn't fall for that trick. The fact of the matter is we have the alternatives. We have the unilateral legal mechanisms in the US Congress. And even if the State Department doesn't want to follow suit, I'm sorry, the State Department isn't charged with making foreign policy. Congress is. The State Department is charged with following the foreign policy that Congress declares. And so it's time also to get Congress to step up to the plate here. We have the means, we have the legal infrastructure, we have moral clarity. This can be done. And I want to turn the floor back over to David.
Thanks so much. Very compelling and lucid remarks. I'd like to just piggyback on a couple of things you said. You talked about applying 907 to Turkey. We know that in addition to using Bayraktar drones, armed drones in the 2020 conflict, that US-made F-16s were also engaged by Turkey in the war effort. We have aerial photography of F-16s on the ground, who were then subsequently engaged in combat operations. So we should think about extending 907 to Turkey. I wholeheartedly support the decision to bar Turkey from the F-35 stealth fighter program. I question why the Biden administration would consider providing F-16s to Turkey instead, or upgrading Turkey's existing arsenal of F-16s. Just shouldn't be done. It's not in our security interest, doesn't align with morality or our foreign policy security priorities. I also want to piggyback on the comment you made about FARA. One of the things that we've seen is that the K Street merchants in Washington have taken huge sums from Turkey and Azerbaijan in order to lobby on their behalf. Very few are held to account. I know for a fact that the Justice Department has been looking at the Atlantic Council and more than $1 million it accepted from Turkish concerns and Turkish officials. It's time to stop investigating. It's time to start prosecuting. And if it's found that these groups have taken government money and advocated on their behalf, then decisions should be taken to remove their 501c3 status and change their legal authority to do business in the United States. Van Krikorian is our next speaker. Van has a wealth of knowledge as the original author of Section 907. He's the co-chairman of the Armenian Assembly of America. I know no one who's better informed and a more compelling advocate than Van. So Van, thanks for joining us today, and the floor is now yours.
Well, thank you, David. Thank you to the other panelists. Thank you also, David, for your team of Maggie and Charlie that have kept up with the atrocity site and more, because that it really is a useful reference for people. And really, I wanted, to use the occasion, first of all, to mourn the loss of life, but also looking back over the last 2 years to put that in some kind of historical perspective as well. One of the things that we've learned is that, a lot of these situations, a lot of the results that seem fair on the facts and the law depend very much on the timing and the politics and a whole bunch of other factors. And it is, as several people have said, with the war in Ukraine, a very fluid situation. And we've been through those kinds of situations before. And second, though, what I had wanted to do was to just reemphasize the need to develop and chronicle all of the evidence of genocidal intent. Gegham spoke about a few, to be particular, attacks that took place, but literally, the ceasefire was supposed to come into effect in November of 2020, and the fighting resumed in December of 2020, with Azerbaijan making additional advances. It continued into 2021 regularly, sometimes in the presence of Russian peacekeepers, which is a whole different issue. It continued in August of 2021, in November, in these are just sort of the major incidents, not just Nagorno-Karabakh, but also into Armenia proper. In March of 2022, Gegham talked about what happened at that Paro village in Artsakh, and additional deaths in March of 2022, in August of 2022. And then, of course, the most recent offensive, unprovoked, into Armenia proper, where we had over 200 people killed and documented clear attacks on civilian institutions and individuals, for which, we're grateful that foreign diplomats went and saw that for themselves. And we started to see a change in the rhetoric from the United States, from France, surprisingly recently even from Great Britain, which recently called on Azerbaijan to return to its prior positions and respect the ceasefire, but with the US and France clearly putting the blame on the attacks on Azerbaijan, and Russia continuing, to not just turn a blind eye, but actually give Azerbaijan and Turkey license to do what they're doing. And ironically, Michael talked about Iran, which deserves more discussion. Iran becoming more and more vocal about the need for Armenia's borders to be respected, and itself establishing a consulate in southern Armenia. Those facts of the continued attacks since there was supposed to be a ceasefire, and I'll just digress for a moment here and say, as a ceasefire statement that President Aliyev signed clearly recognized Nagorno-Karabakh. It uses the term Nagorno-Karabakh, and since then he has taken the position that there is no such entity as Nagorno-Karabakh, and his minions have done the same, his diplomats have done the same, and even though he signed a document that says it, even though he was part of the Minsk group, which still exists under the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as the three co-chairs that are supposed to be mediating the conflict. Even in the face of those facts, we are left with not just the loss of military lives, not just the loss of territories, not just the loss of cultural institutions, not just the pain of the POWs, which has been discussed, but also in this last round of fighting, a completely repulsive mutilation of a female soldier that Speaker Pelosi commented on. Everyone that's seen the evidence has commented on, and it's just acts of barbarism. In addition, during this last round of fighting, Azeri soldiers videoed the murder of a captured Armenian soldier and then shared that with the soldier's wife. Those kinds of things, though, have been going on for a very long time. They went on in the first Nagorno-Karabakh war. People were burned alive. Still, those images of the bodies that I brought back way back then are still with me. The cutting off of appendages of ears, things like that, is still with me. 2016 and later, the beheadings. All of that needs to be fully chronicled. Why? Because we know that the tides turn. And one would think that Azerbaijan and Turkey would have learned that as well. But instead, we get chilling comments, like one we got this month, that basically eliminates any doubt when one of Erdogan's allies, the head of the pan-Turkish party in Turkey, tweeted out the Turkish nation has the power to erase Armenia from history and geography. Those kinds of comments are usually said in private, but increasingly, and I think because of the internet and, from our side also because of the power of Google Translate, I guess, we're able to pick them up more clearly, and the record is clear as to what's going on. If we're able to do that, it's very clear that the major governments involved are also able to do that and know more than we do. Earlier this month, the Cornell-led Caucasus Heritage Project published their analysis of satellite imagery from Nakhichevan, which Michael talked about, which showed from 1997 to present the absolute deliberate destruction of 108 out of 110 remaining Armenian religious and cultural sites. It wasn't just the cemetery at New Jalfa, it was also all of these other things. If those academics are able to do that, imagine what the US government can see. There is nothing going on here that they don't know about. There's nothing going on here that the Russian government doesn't know about. And what is going on is that the Erdogan government is working hand in glove to eliminate the Armenian presence. Why? Again, it's not like historical trends are being invented here for the first time. Autocracies need to blame minorities. They need to foment ethnic hatred to maintain power in this part of the world, at least. There are places where they don't need to do that, but this pattern existed in Europe and this part of Asia for a very long time, and we're all familiar with it. We're all quite familiar with it, actually. And that's what we're seeing occur again. It's worth remembering, to go back even further, Michael referenced Stalin's gerrymandering, that really Stalin's nationalities policy is what caused Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast, it was called at the time of the formation of the Soviet Union, to be placed in Azerbaijan. Even though prior to independence, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan had formed the Transcaucasus Federation, and even after that, the leader of Azerbaijan ceded Nagorno-Karabakh to Armenia. And then, why? Because creating these conflicts between ethnic groups in the Soviet Union was the way to keep Moscow in control. And then later, and here too, I have to give the State Department credit, because they did the analysis that was crystal clear, showing how, understanding that Nagorno-Karabakh having a contiguous border with Armenia would detract from Stalin's nationalities policy, then created Nagorno-Karabakh as an enclave separated from Armenia. And then we understood Turkey's value. Again, a point Michael made, whatever Turkey's value was during the period of the Soviet Union, allowing Erdogan to trade on that anymore is an enormous mistake. But they know that. They absolutely know that. You cannot look at the reports of beheaded people, cannot look at the video coverage and satellite photos of churches being destroyed, which is happening again in Turkey, by the way, along with Armenian cemeteries being destroyed, and not understand what's going on. For us to have to chronicle it is sad, because the US government should be the first ones chronicling it and applying an even hand to call the balls and strikes fairly, and to apply Section 907 as it was intended, as it's clearly written. And we can talk about that. We can talk about the Export Control Act also. David mentioned the use of the F-16s during the war, and there's just too much evidence that equipment that was licensed to Turkey was re-exported to Azerbaijan, or for Azerbaijan's benefit, if not directly transferred to them, to to be used. We can talk about, Senator Menendez previously asking the General Accounting Office to review the prior waivers under Section 907, which showed that clearly the law was not complied with, and nothing happens. Why not? That's where I think the role of David, your project, Michael, your work, Professor, your very lucid and clear expositions, and Gegham, your really important work in documenting all of this as a true, human rights protector, and your predecessor, Artsakh, as well, is really important and greatly appreciated, because I actually am optimistic that the tide will turn. I think we're going to have to go through some pain, but if we did not think the tide would turn, because we think we understand American people, we think we understand, from our friends in other countries, that that freedom will win, and that human dignity will win. And that's the way people would like to live, despite the rule of some very bad people, not just in Turkey and in Azerbaijan, of course, but everywhere, that we are on the right side of history. And being more adamant and more vocal about that is what we need to do. There are existing laws that prevent what's going on. But the truth is that when the United States during the Trump administration broke the parity that had existed, even the rough parity that existed, and gave Azerbaijan like 120 million more in military aid than what it gave to Armenia, it sent a terrible signal. That disparity needs to be fixed if the United States wants to be taken seriously in the region. The United States needs to address that and fix it. When 907 initially was passed, it was passed in one version, and then there were negotiations that led to the final version with the administration. It's quite clear how it was going to work. And then all of that changed after 9/11. But because the waiver provision was inserted then, it opened up military assistance to Armenia. That intent has not played out the way that it should have. And that needs to be corrected. And the reasons for placing the waiver are probably no longer there. That the law ought to be applied as written. And certainly the waivers are not advancing US interests anymore. Everyone has recognized the role that hydrocarbons play here. When the EU signed an agreement with Aliyev and acted as if, he was Mahatma Gandhi in terms of being a wonderful guy, because he was going to start sending oil and gas to Europe, which would help them because they're anticipating the cutoff of the Russian gas. European, not just European civil society organizations, but political actors reacted as well. In terms of sanctions, to apply the laws consistently, I think the Biden administration understands that needs to be done. In terms of the human tragedies, though, as optimistic as I am, we are on the right side of history and things will work out. Right before we started talking, and I'm sure Gegham noticed it, but we haven't come back to him, Azerbaijan attacked Armenia again. Today, as we're talking, after the UN General Assembly, after, their top person in Armenia's national security advisor met with Jake Sullivan yesterday. Jake Sullivan came out and thought they made great progress in a peaceful resolution. And here we go again. And I feel like we need to be prepared for that for a very long time. until the United States corrects that disparity in military assistance. That needs to be done. And if US sanctions policy which has broadened substantially, the sanctions were something that were not nearly used as much as they became used in more recent times. But if US policy is going to be taken seriously on that, it's got to be applied consistently. The Columbia Project has documented perpetrators of the atrocities, not just the fact that the atrocities took place, but it's actually identified, through telegram channels, through credible reports, through other places, because some of these people President Aliyev actually gave medals to, people who had cut off the heads of Armenians. If the United States can't sanction those people, why won't other countries view the policy that sanctions people they might support as being hypocritical? I will actually stop here, even though I could go on for quite a while. I hope I've added something, and I hope I've added some perspective, and I know that we have some questions. But I don't want to start going into detail on more subjects, because I realize we've been on for about an hour and a half already. And even my mother used to tell me not to talk too long.
Dan, mom is always right. You made a comment about the mutilation of a female soldier.
Yes.
I want the audience to know that an Armenian American who is a frequent visitor to the Artsakh Atrocities Project website called that to our attention. I wrote directly to the 2 UN special rapporteurs with responsibility for those kinds of crimes, and I haven't received no reply. Unless the UN reacts, condemns, and takes action, then it becomes an accomplice to that crime. I'd like to say the same thing about US officials. The Artsakh Atrocities Project site has been called to their attention repeatedly. We've identified the perpetrators of crimes and urged that sanctions be brought against them. Travel sanctions, freezing of their overseas assets. Unless the US takes real action, not just rhetorical statements, then it too becomes an accomplice. Now, I understand full well that there's a big push to replace Russian oil and gas supplies, and that Azerbaijan is envisioned as playing a role there. But it's important to recognize that you cannot defeat an autocracy through partnership with other autocrats. Working with Aliyev to provide energy supplies, with Erdogan to do mediation, which ultimately only serves Turkey's interests, is a fundamental betrayal of principles, and it's just simply not in America's national security or international interests. So I would call on both the US government and the UN to be more proactive, to be more principled. We're looking at a situation where innocent civilians are being slaughtered and mutilated. We can't sit on the sideline and be quiet. If anybody needs evidence of that, all they have to do is go to the Artsakh Atrocities website, and there's ample images, stories, and articles that provide documentation of what's gone on. So I know everybody's busy, and there are surely lots of questions here, but let me just invite the panelists to ask questions of one another or to make a concluding statement. And rather than open things up to the audience, I think we'll keep the discussion with the panel for now. So Gegham, let me turn to you to make a concluding statement, summarizing some of the things that we've discussed and highlighting any steps forward.
You're muted.
Okay. I listened to all the speeches and all the insights, and you know, living in Artsakh, when we try to voice to raise our voice and to reach to not only Armenians of diaspora, but also other people who share the same values and who are struggling for the justice. Always for me, I have an impression that we are not doing enough to reach all those people. But today's discussion just showed that really there are people who are closely monitoring the situation, and there are people who are with us fighting for finding the ways how to prevent the aggression, how to punish the aggression of Azerbaijan and Turkey. And in this sense, I can say that this gives us hope to continue our work, to continue to live in Artsakh and in Armenia, and having the support of different professionals and different people who really care about human rights, who really care about Armenia and Artsakh, and who really are ready to stand with us and to fight against the autocracy, as you mentioned, and to fight against the state-sponsored terrorism that is being carried out by Azerbaijan. So to conclude, I would like to once again thank all the panelists, and I have no question in this regard. And just to express my gratitude and to express my hope that these kind of discussions will be continued, and we will have more opportunities to talk and to try to discuss these issues and to try to find new solutions and find new ways for fighting, for opposing new waves of escalation and aggression. Thank you.
Gegham, our thanks are for you. From the beginning of our work on the Artsakh Atrocities Project, we've cooperated hand in glove with the Artsakh Ombudsman for Human Rights. You're doing a critically important and excellent job, and we look forward to continued cooperation. The site has been a platform for posting information, including analysis from the panelists today. It includes a section on violations of international humanitarian law, to which Tom McDonnell has contributed. Tom, let me ask you if you have a statement that you want to make in closing.
Yeah, thank you, David. And I want to thank the other members of the panel. I thought this was a very interesting discussion. Yeah, I think what we need is broad international condemnation, first of the recent aggression that happened, only weeks ago. Secondly, a condemnation of ethnic cleansing, tending towards crimes against humanity and possibly genocide. And lastly, a recognition that the international community has to come together about this. This cannot be, it cannot be like what happened with the first Armenian genocide. So I think the conscience of the international community has to come together to condemn these acts and to recognize that this is this is a potential for even greater, for more deadly armed conflict. Thank you.
Mr. Rubin, there's no stronger or more compelling voice on these issues than you. And since you're in Washington, you've just done amazing work to raise the profile of Armenian issues and to recommend remedies and actions by the U.S. government. Let me ask you if there's a closing statement that you want to make.
He left. He had to go.
Is he gone?
He was one of the guys who had to go at 1:30.
Yeah, people in Washington always have someplace else to be.
I think his closing statement was, "I have to go at 1:30.
And then let's turn to you. Is there something that you want to say in closing?
Of course. Even though these governments know better than we do what's going on, what is important, as I think everybody here agrees, is for us to publicize it as much as possible, and then to ask policymakers to take action consistent with our principles, which is why we ask people, if they can't visit their representatives, to go online and participate in action alerts and things like that, and talk and bring exposure to these things so that everybody can lead a better life. What Gegham said bothered me, though, that they're trying to close the ICRC office in Stepanyan. And one of the, again, just because of time, we couldn't get into everything, but during the period before the 2020 war, when the Minsk group was conducting discussions, and after the 2016 war, the number of monitors was supposed to be increased, the ceasefire monitors. There were supposed to be an investigative mechanism to determine who breached a certain ceasefire and other measures, confidence building measures. Azerbaijan didn't fulfill any of its obligations there, just as it has not kept any of its obligations. And the Minsk, they agreed to a process with three principles, primarily the non-use of force to resolve conflicts. They breached that regularly, and those reports were given every month to the OSCE, and I think also filed with the UN. As an alternative, though, the need for Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh, at least to get monitors on their own territory who could bear public witness to what was going on, that need is still there. It's absolutely still there. Now, there's some thought that technology could replace human observers. Now, for anybody to travel to Nagorno-Karabakh, it's more challenging. I know the U.S. Embassy put out a warning on where American citizens could travel to within Armenia, and they also, unfortunately, included in there that travel to Nagorno-Karabakh is prohibited, which I'm sure was out of fear for more fighting, but still is an important fact. The need for people who don't live in Nagorno-Karabakh to go there, the need for Nagorno-Karabakh to have more international presence is critical. It's also something we went through. A lot of people who are newer to the conflict don't remember that, after Nagorno-Karabakh petitioned, according to the Soviet Constitution for freedom, they were met with an enormous military campaign in which the Russians, the Soviets, allied themselves with the Azeris in Operation Ring and started the depopulation of Nagorno-Karabakh. At that time, they were under a terrible blockade. At that time, there was actually no heat, no electricity in Armenia either. They were awful times. I remember it well. And the answer was to get more international presence there and to basically use sunshine as the best disinfectant. Now, we're in a position to do more than that now, and we will. The people who are living there deserve our love and our credit and respect. And again, for the families who lost loved ones on this anniversary of the war, our hearts are with you. I know that we got questions, and there was one from Chris Parnagian about how the border not being delimited. The borders in the Soviet Union had to be respected as they were drawn during the Soviet Union. That was a condition to United States recognition. as the Soviet Union broke up. And not just the inter-republic borders, but it's also clear, I remember, that it was borders, internal borders, such as it was then of the Nagorno-Karabakh Autonomous Oblast. If you remember, and if you don't remember, I'll just say it. You know, at Christmas time in 1991, the United States recognized and extended diplomatic relations to some of the republics of what's now the former Soviet Union. To some, it only extended recognition until they engaged in certain reforms and made some commitments. One of those was Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan did not get diplomatic relations at the time Armenia did. Why? In part because the United States was insisting that there be respect for borders, including then the border of Nagorno-Karabakh. Reminding people of those kinds of things and how sort of transactional foreign policy usually ends up in disaster when it's done with dictators is also worthwhile. So I guess I'll just close on that. And you know, to be very technical though, Chris, to delimit the border is a painstaking process. The border with Georgia is not delimited yet either. There are lots of borders that are not yet marked out completely. But there are the contours. Everybody knows, you know, where they are. And the fact is that Azerbaijan penetrated well into Armenia proper and has done so as part of the consistent plan. David mentioned, you know, their ambitions. It hasn't been said, but even though, again, the November 2020 agreement said that Armenia would get a corridor to Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan would have road access, essentially, but not a corridor to Nakhichevan. Now, they've tried to unilaterally change that and pressure Armenia to not just giving that up, but far more territory as well. Those facts are clear, not because I say so, but it's the best evidence. The Azeris and Turks say so themselves. It's right there. Thank you again, David, and your team. It was very nice to see people even remotely, and hopefully we'll see each other in person more now.
Before we conclude, I just want to say a word about the Genocide Convention. The convention requires signatories to prevent and punish those who commit genocide. The U.S. is a signatory. We can't turn a blind eye to what Turkey and Azerbaijan have done just because it's politically expedient. Our panel today provides an opportunity to express solidarity. It also sends a message to the victims of Turkic aggression that their suffering and their plight is known to us and that they are not forgotten. The worst thing that can happen to someone who is a victim of abuse is to feel that no one is paying attention to their plight. It's like a tree that falls in the forest. If no one is there to hear it or see it, has it actually happened? Well, through the Artsakh Atrocities Project, we can attest that these crimes have happened. We've documented them extensively. We continue to update the site routinely. And we just want to say a word of solidarity with Armenian people so they know that they're not alone. We want to express our appreciation to Armenian Americans and other friends who work with us on documentation. And I just want to pledge that Columbia University is in this for the long haul. Now, we will remain vigilant, we will bear witness, and we will urge action so that the victims of crimes against humanity have some remedy. And so US policymakers know that if they ignore what's happened to Armenians, that the electorate will respond. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists today. This was a great discussion, great presentations. It merely highlights on the 2-year anniversary, not only what's happened, but how much more work there is to do. And we pledge to undertake that work in partnership with you all. We're available anytime, so please don't hesitate to be in touch. Again, thanks to the panelists, thanks to the participants, and now we are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
Thank you.